In this episode, we're going to expand on the combat stuff that we made in the previous episode, and we're also going to add an enemy for us to be able to actually start to fight. Before we get into any of that, I do want to make one quick update to our game manager autoload script. So I think I might have mentioned this in a previous video, but this get character is actually redundant. We're always going to be able to reference the game manager.character because we're registering our character to this variable. So we can actually get rid of that, and this will not affect our game at all. Then we're going to add something that's really important for either our character or our enemies to be able to take or deal damage. So we're going to make our hitbox and hurtbox scripts and scenes right now. So let's create a new folder. We're just going to call this, I'm going to call it components. And inside of that, we're going to make two new folders, one for hitbox and one for hurtbox. And we can start with our hitbox. So let's make a new scene. It's going to be, call this our hitbox, and it's going to be a type of area 2D. Every hitbox is going to need a collision shape. And let's just go ahead and add a script to this. So let's give it a class name of hitbox. It can extend area 2D. We actually don't need any code in here right now. The only thing we're going to have is an export variable for damage, which is an integer, and it can equal 1 for right now. So the concept of hitboxes and hurtboxes always kind of confuse me. I look back at when I've been playing any first-person shooters, and I always thought that hitboxes were the enemies. You know, the enemy had a hitbox, which is where I'm going to deal damage. But that's sort of what the hurtbox is going to be. So the hitbox deals damage, and the hurtbox is where we receive damage. So I've never heard of a hurtbox until I started working with Godot or in game dev. So I kind of get confused, and I go back and forth on what each of them are, and I get confused myself. So if you find yourself getting confused around these, definitely don't worry about that. But once we get moving on this, hopefully it will kind of all come together. So let's create our hurtbox now, and we'll do the same thing here. We'll add a script, give it a class name of hurtbox. I'm going to leave a comment in here also, just so if we ever forget. This is our receive damage. And the only thing we're going to do here, we do need to have a collision shape added. The only thing we're going to do, we can click on our hurtbox, click on node, and we're going to connect a signal here. And we want to do this area entered signal. So we're going to connect to that. And we are going to check if the area is a hitbox and the owner has method take damage. Then owner dot take damage. Then we give it the area dot damage. So this area will be referring to this hitbox and then the damage amount here. We still need to make out this take damage method for, it's going to be a method that we're going to have for all of our enemies as well as our character. So let's go into our character now, and let's update that. So we can go into our scripts, character, and in order for us to be able to take damage, we're also going to need some health. So we're going to have an export variable for max health, which is an integer. We'll make it 10 for right now. And then we'll have a variable for current health, which is an integer, and it's just going to equal our max health. Then we can go down to the bottom of our script, and let's make our take damage method. So take damage is going to take in an amount, which is an integer, and it's not going to return anything. What we're going to do is we get our current health, subtract the amount, and then if our current health is less than or equal to 0, we ultimately will be playing a death animation loading to a death screen. But for right now, while we don't have that, we're just going to print character died. Else, we check if our animation player has animation or hit. And if it does, animation player dot play hit. Just a little safety check here. Not necessary if we know we're going to have it, especially since it's our character. It's not like this is on our enemy where they might have different animations depending on whether it's a slime enemy or whether it's a zombie or something like that. We're not going to assign our hitboxes and hurtboxes to our character yet. Let's go build out our enemy base class, and then we can build out our slime. Our slime is going to be our first enemy, and the assets for that are in the characters. We're using this slime purple. So let's go create a character body 2D. Ooh, not that one. I want to do a fresh character body 2D. We're going to name this enemy. And we're going to save this into scenes, characters, and we'll create a new folder for enemy. And we are going to need a sprite 2D for this. We're going to need a collision shape. We're going to need an animation player. We're also going to have a node, which we're going to call state machine. So we're going to be able to reuse our current state machine to work with our enemies as well. And our enemy will have a hitbox and a hurtbox, so we can just drag those in there now. We're not going to do any setup inside of here though. And then now we can write our script. So I'm going to set this up in its right folder also. So we'll go to scripts, characters, new folder, enemy. Okay, can get rid of all of this. Let's give it a class name so we'll be able to extend from it. So we'll give it a class name of enemy. And we're going to have a signal of died, so we can emit that signal when our enemy's dead. And we're going to need our sprite, our state machine, and our animation player. So I'm going to just not sprite 2D, we're just going to call it sprite. The rest of these are fine. We're going to have an export, actually going to do an export range of this. So we're going to do 0 to 100, which is a variable for our max health. It's an integer. We'll have it equal to 3 on the default. And then we'll have another export range of 10 to 200, which is going to be our move speed. And that's just going to be a float. And we're going to use a setter for our current health. This is going to be an integer. And then we set the value. It's going to be equal to our current health equals clamp I, value 0, max health. So this is going to make sure that we're not going to be going lower than 0. And then we can check if our current health is less than or equal to 0, we die, which is a method that we'll be making as we build out this enemy class. So let's get our ready method. And all we're going to do is current health is equal to our max health. And in our physics process, we're going to access our state machine. We're actually going to build out really quickly after we set up the rest of this script. We're going to build out an enemy specific state machine, which is going to be needed just because there's going to be collisions with our player state machine. So we just want to separate our enemy state machine from our player state machine, but it'll be much easier for us to set up the enemy one now that we have the base of our player state machine. So we're going to get our state machine, and we don't have type hints now because this isn't an actual state machine yet. It's just a node. We're going to get its current state, and then we get our state machine, and we're going to do our physics update. We pass in delta, and then we can move and slide. Then we're going to create our take damage method, which takes in an amount of an integer, and it doesn't return anything, and all it's going to do is current health minus equal the amount. Then we get we're going to create our die method. So die does not take in or return anything. We're just going to emit our signal of died, and then we're going to queue free. Queue free is just going to remove our enemy from the scene completely out of the memory. And we're going to want to build on the death animation, make it, more interesting than just having them disappear. But for now, this is going to be good for us just to get our enemy kind of set up and off screen when we kill it. We're going to have a face player method, and it's going to check just to make sure that we have a game manager.character. And then if we do, we're going to sprite, we're going to flip on the horizontal, and we get our game manager, our character's global position on the x-axis. And if it's greater than the enemy's global position on the x-axis. That will determine whether we flip or not. Then lastly, we're going to have our play animation method, which takes in an animation name, which is a string. Again, this is similar to what we did for our character. And we have if animation player has the animation of the animation name we're passing in, and we're going to use our animation player to play that animation name. Now that we have that, we should actually set up our enemy state machine. So let's go here and attach a script. We're going to call this our enemy state machine. Let's put this in a folder. We'll go to our scripts, characters, enemy. I'm going to make a new folder. Just put state in here. We will create this. And we can go find our current state machine. And we're really going to be able to take the same stuff, except we're not going to want to, we don't need to handle input, right? Because our enemies, we're not going to control our enemies. So let's go in, let's just copy and paste all of this, make sure we give it a new class name, call it enemy state machine. And instead of the current state being a state, we're going to use an enemy state. So really anywhere that we use the state class, we want to change it to enemy state. And there's only a couple here that has that. And so I think that should handle it. So now we have to create an actual state class as well. So let's go into that folder. We're going to create a script for our enemy state. Ooh, let me rename that to be all lowercase. And we can do the same thing here. Let's go find our state, copy and paste. And we just want to call it enemy state. And we want the state machine to be an enemy state machine. So now if we go back to our state machine here, we should be good to go. Now we can create our slime. So we're going to make a character body 2D. I'm going to call him slime. It's just going to take our enemy.gd script. And let's save this. So let's go into our scenes, characters, enemy. If you want, you can create another folder for slime. That's what I'm going to do right now. And let's go to our 2D. We're going to add a sprite 2D, which we can use our assets, which is going to be our slime purple. On the animation tab, it's going to be 16 on the H frames, and that's it. Move them up here. We can save that. We will add a collision shape, which we're going to come back to. We're going to add an animation player. And we're going to have two animations. We're going to have our idle, which is going to be a second long, and we're going to on 0.2 on the snap. Let's go back to our sprite. And we're just going to use the first few frames. So we're going to key in on 0. And then let's just build this out. So that should be, we want it to loop. And then we also want it to autoplay on load. So now whenever we put a slime inside of any scene, he's just going to default to be in his idle state. So now if I play this, that's going to be our little slime bouncing around. Then we're going to make a new animation. We're going to call it move. It's going to be 1.5 seconds long, and the snap is going to be 0.1. Let's go back to our sprite, and let's key in on 0, and then just key in the rest of these frames until we get to 1.5. And let's make sure it loops, but not autoplay. So there we go. This is what our guy's going to look like when he's bouncing around. We'll be able to tweak the speed too if we want, like his, the animation speed. If we want him to look a little faster, maybe the slime gets angry or something and he starts moving faster. So we can do that if we want to. All right, so let's pause this. We need to make sure that our slime has a state machine. So let's call this our state machine. We're going to assign it the enemy state machine. Let's go back to our enemy. Actually, this reminds me, we need to re-drag in our state machine already. So let's do that. This node this should be an enemy state machine. So that's what we want here. You can also just change that. I guess I thought it would catch that for me when I dragged it in, but that's fine. Now inside of our slime state machine, we're going to add 2 nodes. We're going to have idle and move. And what we're going to do here is we are going to add new scripts for each of these. So we're not going to inherit anything. We're going to go into our scripts folder, characters, enemy, state, and we're going to call this slime idle. And we're going to do the same thing here, and we will call this slime move. Just going to make sure it's in the right folder. Ooh, that's not what we want. Enemy, state. All right, so let's go to our slime move. We're going to give it a class name, slime, or sorry, we're in our slime idle state. Yeah, slime idle state. So we want to call this our slime idle state, and it's going to extend enemy state. You can get rid of this code. The only thing we're going to have here is an export variable called detect range, which is going to be a float. It's going to be 100. This is going to be the distance from our player that we want our slime to start moving towards the player. So we're going to give him a physics update, pass in a delta, a float. It's not going to return anything. We do a check on if the owner is enemy. We return. Otherwise, we get a variable of enemy, owner as enemy. And we get the distance. It's going to be equal to our enemy dot global position dot distance to, and it's going to be our character's distance dot global position. Then we check that distance. If it's less than our detect range, we state machine, we change state, and then we go to move. So now we can build out our move state, slime move state. We're going to have what we're going to call our lose interest range. So this is going to be when our player is a certain distance away from the slime, he'll go back to his idle state. So let's do our physics update. It does pass in delta. And we do enemy here. We do owner as enemy. We get our distance again. So we want our enemy dot global position distance to our game manager dot character dot global position. And then if our distance is greater than the lose interest range, we get our state machine. Oh, okay, yeah, I need to extend from enemy state. That's why I didn't get these type hints. We get our state machine, we change our state, we go back to idle, and then we return so we don't continue down this code path. Otherwise, we get the direction, which is going to be our game manager dot character dot global position minus our enemy's global position, and then we're going to normalize it. Then we get our enemy dot velocity. It's going to equal toward for our direction times our enemy dot move speed, and then we get our enemy, and we face the player. We are also going to need a hitbox and a hurtbox here. So let's drag our hitbox and our hurtbox here. I did want to make a small change to the size of our slime. So if we go to our test level and we drag in our slime, where is he? If I drag him in, he's kind of big. I don't know, maybe you like how big the slime is. But I think for my purposes, I'm going to go to our transform and scale and just scale him down 0.75. Make him a little bit smaller. So I think that looks a little bit better. He's not as big. And then we can create his collision shape. So let's make this. We're going to give it a circle. And we can make it a little bit like that. Like that. That's fine. And for our slime, the collision, not that collision, we want this collision layer. He's going to be an enemy, and he's only going to mask for the ground. We're going to use our hitboxes and hurtboxes to be masking for the player. So if we go back, so our hitbox is when we deal damage. So let's add a collision shape here. And we're going to give this our hitbox collision just for better naming. We can go back to our slimes 2D. And this is where he's going to deal damage. It's probably going to be slightly smaller than this, just to give our player like a little bit of leeway here. So let's make this a circle, and let's make it a little bit smaller. So let's go to our character and just, or we actually have to do one more thing on here. So our hitbox is going to be an enemy, and it's going to mask for our player, which I think is layer 5. Actually, we aren't going to need to put this on an enemy layer. It just needs to mask for our player. And then we can also adjust some monitoring and monitorable stuff on our hitbox. So we want it to be monitoring, so it's actively checking for collisions, but it doesn't need to be monitorable, so it doesn't need to be detected by others. So this is what we're going to need for our hitbox. And then for our hurtbox, let's add a collision shape. We're going to also make it a circle. I'm going to make this a little bit more forgiving for the player as well. So I'm going to make this red, so that means he's being hurt, and I'm going to make this slightly bigger than everything else, so it allows our player to hit the slime from a little bit further away. You can rename this to hurtbox collision. And now let's go into our hurtbox and go to the collision. And our hurtbox is going to be on layer 9, and it's not going to mask for anything. And then we can do monitoring is false here, so it doesn't check for collisions, but it can be detected by others. Then we can go back to our character. We need to set up our hit and hurt boxes for this guy too. So let's just add the hurt box for right now. So let's add a collision shape, hurt box, collision, and we're going to make this a rectangle. And since this is where he can be hurt, so this is where he's receiving damage, we're going to make this, again, a little bit more forgiving for the player. So let's do that. And then I think that's good, maybe even in one more. So he's got to get really, really close in order to take damage. Our hitbox is going to be a little bit different because we need to assign it to our sword, which I think is something we're going to cover in our next video. But for now, if we go to our character and, okay, so we can print character died when we get to less than 0. Let's just also print, we're going to print our current health just so we can get some feedback in the output. So now, oh, we have to configure the layers for our character also. So our hurt box, it's going to be on the player layer of 5. It doesn't need to mask. It doesn't need to monitor, but it does need to be monitorable. Okay, so let's go back to our test level. We have our slime and our player. Let's play the scene. So we load in and we can see that our slime is already in idle. Okay. He's not moving because we're not close. Okay. So something here is not configured correctly. So is our character, okay, is our enemy. All right. Oh, I don't think I ever set a move speed. Okay. So, no, he defaults to 10. Let's make it more. Okay, so instead of doing it in there, let's see if we default it to here. I guess in export range, does it default to 0, maybe? Okay, well, let's try that. If we give it a float, a default. Yeah, there we go. Okay, great. think we're having some issues with our hurt box and detecting collisions. So I tried to make my slime's hitbox much bigger just to make this easier. So let's go into our hurt box, and instead of doing through here, let's disconnect. Okay, so after a little bit of debugging, the issue that was happening was, as I even mentioned going into this, the hitboxes and hurt boxes confuse me. So if we go to our hitbox, we basically need to switch the hitbox on area entered from our hurtbox into our hitbox, right? I decided to connect manually rather than through the node in our hitbox, and we're doing the same thing that we did in our hurtbox, except we're checking if the area on our on hitbox area entered, we're checking if the area is a hurtbox, and we have the method. And if it is, we take damage. Otherwise, we aren't. So then we go to our character. You want to make sure your hurtbox layers have monitorable as off, or monitoring off, monitorable on, the hitbox monitoring on, and monitorable off. We're going to set up the collision layers for this in a future episode. And then in our slime, same thing here. Hitbox monitoring on, monitorable off. Hurtbox monitoring off, monitorable on. And the hitbox on our slime is masking on 5. And the hurtbox is on the enemy layer. And in our character, the hitbox will set up later, but the hurtbox is layer 5. So now let's just give our character a health of 1 so that when we take damage, we should see this character died. Print debug statement. So let's run into our, and then we see this, our character died. So we'll handle that a little bit more elegantly in a future episode, but I think this will wrap this one up. Please let me know in the comments if you have any better suggestions on the hit and hurt box thing. Sorry for all the confusion there, but hopefully this will get us to a point where we can continue to move forward in this this series. And I think in our next episode, we're going to just build out the sword player attack more, and we're going to add a hit animation for our slime and implement a health system.